Welcome to another episode of the Less is More Sports podcast. As always, Matt and I are back with some fresh content in the world of sports. And as always, it's becoming like a weekly tradition that I just flex one of my many jerseys that I have. So today I am rocking the Derrick Rose McDonald's All-American jersey. And fun fact, Matt, I was actually at that game when the McDonald's All-American game came to Louisville in 2007. Oh, let me tell you,
Wow.
that was a loaded McDonald's All-American class. You had, of course, Derrick Rose. You had, at the time, one of the top high school players in the nation in O.J. Mayo. You had Blake Griffin. You had James Harden. And, of course, I got to throw my Duke guys in there, Kyle Singler and Nolan Smith. And at the time, Taylor King, who was committed to Duke. But, of course, shout out to your Indiana Hoosiers. Eric Gordon was also there as well. And I don't know about you, but I still believe to this day that if Eric Gordon never had injuries, he would have been an all-star player in the NBA.
Oh, yeah, no question. I mean, how many times has he been in the conversation for Sixth Man of the Year and he won it? Guy's got a silky smooth shot. He was very elusive. He's a great scorer, and in the modern NBA, that would have translated very well, but injury's going to happen, and being sent to the Clippers is going to happen. So back before the Clippers were a powerhouse type squad. So, yeah, I always wonder what would have happened if Eric Gordon was healthy for most of his career, because he and E.J. White were just very good together. So, yeah, it's one of the great what ifs of sports to me, but you live and learn.
But it was a very fun, entertaining game, and O.J. Mayo, of course, had a shot to win the game, but, of course, it went out, and that might have been the downfall to his basketball career. We will never know. However, we will get started in today's topic, but before we do, I just want to talk about last night's game between the Ravens and Chiefs because it really just made me mad. The viewers of the show know that I'm a big Patty Mahomes fan, and of course, the narrative of the game would have been a lot different if Clyde Edwards-Helaire just hangs on to the dang ball.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, everyone's talking about Lamar and the plays he made, which he made some good plays, but geez, man, Mahomes would have had another game-winning drive. It would have been some more Mahomes magic if all Clyde had to do was hang on to the ball. And let me tell you, the Lamar stands are letting me have it right now. And I'm like, dude, you do realize you are a running back holding on to the ball away from losing that game, right? Come on, man.
Right.
Do better, fans. Do better.
Now, Les, I'm gonna ask you something. What am I wearing in general terms?
You're wearing a hat.
Mm-hmm. And what happens if I take off the hat? What would that be called in vernacular language?
You're not wearing a hat?
Which means it's No Cap Monday, because I'm going to hit you with something right now. The Ravens deserve to win that ball game. And I'm going to tell you why. I know you're being dogged by the Lamar stands, and I know that sucks for you, but let me tell you something. Baltimore had absolutely no one at running back. I mean, Latavius Murray, yes, but how long has he been a Raven? Like a week? They've got no running backs. The offensive line is banged up. They're putting Ben Cleveland, who's a rookie draft pick, into the ball game. There's no reason why they should have been in that game to begin with. Tyrann Mathieu had a pick six and another interception. They could have been very frazzled at the fact they have no running game. They're loaded with injuries, and the Kansas City Chiefs gave them the biggest punch they could. They brought in Frank Clark back from the injured reserve. They brought in Tyrann Mathieu from the COVID list, and they balled out. And they're going up against a team with no running backs. Hollywood Brown had an ankle injury. I mean, there is no reason why the Baltimore Ravens should have been in that game. But no cap, they deserve to win it. And I stand by that. I mean, when you've got the Kansas City Chiefs on that fourth down play, they had a chance to get the ball back right where they left off. Right where they left off. It would have been like the Clyde Edwards-Helaire fumble never happened, and who knows, we're talking about Travis Kelce going 20 yards again. But they couldn't anticipate the one thing that had worked for Baltimore all night, which is Lamar Jackson is just too damn fast. And he was too damn fast again on fourth down. And the Kansas City Chiefs could not anticipate that. And it blows my mind that they didn't know, hey, the dude who's literally backflipping into the end zone is going to get the ball here. And so, honest to God, Baltimore deserved that win. I will give all the props in the world to Baltimore. They had a depleted roster. They were playing what many people think is the best team in the NFL. And the result of last night's game is that for the first time since Patrick Mahomes became a starter, the Chiefs are not in first place in the AFC West. I know it's week 2, but still, that's a big mental blow. The Chiefs will be fine. Patrick Mahomes will be an MVP candidate. But no cap Monday, Baltimore deserved to win that game.
You were right. It's no cap that Baltimore deserved to win that game, because at the end of the day, the win is all that matters. And you're also right. They deserve to win that game just with how the energy they played all game. But let me tell you where you did cap, Matt. You are right with the injuries that are have depleted that roster. The injuries to Rashad Bateman, that offensive line, those running backs, J.K. Dobbin and Gus Edwards. But that seemed to not affect the running game at all, because they still rushed for 200 yards. So at the end of the day, the Chiefs did deserve to lose that game just because they could not do one thing, and that is stop the Ravens' running attack. Tyson Williams has been a godsend to the Ravens offense. Latavius Murray has seemingly just picked up that Ravens system just like that. Like you said, he's been with the team, like a week or so? Well,
yeah.
He couldn't tell me that last night because, he knew exactly where his blockers were going to be, and he found the open lanes. And, of course, we all know that Lamar Jackson is the best quarterback in the read option scenario because he's just such a weapon, dude. If you favor the inside to the running back at all, he can just bounce it out to the outside, and there he goes. And then he's cartwheeling into the end zone, just like we saw. So I take nothing away from the Ravens, but I do just want to point out that if Clyde Edwards-Helaire does not fumble that ball, it's still a Chiefs win. It just is, man.
You don't know.
Because a lot about on this show, Matt, is that we talk about social media narratives, and I would have loved to see the change in narrative if he had hung on to that ball. Now we're not talking about Lamar. We're talking about how Mahomes just does it again. How you got Lamar taking the lead late in the game, cartwheeling in the end zones, and all of a sudden, Mahomes is going to just march down the field and get it. Put Harrison Butker in another game-winning kick scenario, and here it goes again. That's what separates Mahomes and Lamar, yada yada yada. So that's more or less where I'm going with that. But of course, you all know I'm a big Mahomes fan. Anytime he's got an opportunity to get a game-winning drive and it just doesn't happen, I'm disappointed. And I was talking to Tierney last night, and she even said, "Well, you can't really put this on Pat because it'd be different." It'd be different if he threw an interception in that scenario. But no, he hands the ball off to the running back, he fumbles it. Nothing he can really do about that. But no,
not at all.
But it was a great game. Hats off to Lamar for getting his first win against the Kansas City Chiefs. Something that is one of the many things that has plagued his NFL reputation. So it's good to finally see him get that under his belt. But yeah, it was a great game. We've actually been blessed with some really good games in this early NFL season. But, however, that is not the topic for today's show. As hard as it is to believe, Matt, we are a quarter of the way through the college football season. And we had another great slate of games this weekend, as we have seemingly had this entire season. And Matt, what are some of your early thoughts from this weekend?
Well, the first one coming from the noon kickoffs was that Michael Penix Jr. is not the same quarterback he was last year. I don't know what exactly has got changed from year to year because the offensive weapons are still there. You still have Freifogel. You still have Hendershot. If anything, the running backs, Stevie Scott was like a heart and soul guy. But if anything, the situation's gotten better because you have like 3 guys now making up for that. But Michael Penix just looks like, I don't know if he's playing gingerly because of what happened last season with the ruptured Achilles or what's going on with him because he's not playing. The decision-making just isn't there. It wasn't there against Iowa. It was there against Idaho, but it's Idaho. By the way, it was good to see another Petrino back in the area, even if he was coaching Idaho. It's kind of fun to beat a Petrino, not going to lie. But it's Idaho. Let's be honest. It's an FBS program. No shade on them, nothing like that. But you're supposed to win that game, and you're supposed to win it by a lot. And the decision-making wasn't there against Cincinnati this weekend either. There were a couple of just inexplicably bad throws. The guy's total QBR is in the 30s after being in the upper 70s during last year. And last year's schedule was a hell of a lot tougher. So it really doesn't make any sense. I mean, I know Cincinnati's the number 9 team in the country, and Iowa has rocketed to the top 5. But still, if your QBR is in the 70s and 80s and you get hurt and it drops down to the 30s, and your throws just look so errant, it's not funny. I mean, the Indiana offense, after they got down in the second half, was basically just, we're going to run a couple plays, and then Michael Penix Jr. is going to just throw this ball, loft it into the heavens, and hope to God that like the spirits of Bloomington's founding fathers look down upon it and guide it into the hands of AJ Freifogel. It's not sustainable, especially in the Big Ten. And the Big Ten had a very good weekend too, because Penn State looks great. Michigan seems to be back for now. Michigan State just beat the ever-loving snot out of Miami. And those are all teams in IU's division, and you can't play games like that where you're playing from behind, or you get the lead and then you just have an inexplicable collapse, or you can't get it done offensively after you take the lead. You cannot do that in the Big Ten East, or you will be under 500 and you will not be going to a bowl game. And that begins at the quarterback position, whether we want to admit it or not. Much like we credit Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson with doing very well. I don't know where that came from. I was thinking of Michael Penix and Lamar Jackson and combined them in the strangest possible scenario. And as much as we praise guys and we don't really want to pin losses on them, Michael Penix is just not – his head just doesn't seem to be in the right space. And like I said, I don't know if that's a residue from that horrible injury he suffered or what. But the good news from that game is that I'm very pleased with the way Cincinnati bounced back. We have been saying forever that, Cincinnati, they look okay, but what are they going to do when they're under pressure? And they're on the road in the Big Ten. It's the first sellout game at Memorial Stadium since, I don't know, the 1940s, because that's how long it's been since IU football was relevant. And you go in there and you get punched in the mouth. You're down, and Desmond Ridder leads you back into the game. Your defense leads you back into the game. Now, I know a lot of IU fans are salty about that targeting call. And, targeting needs to be addressed at the college level. That's another takeaway I think you and I will both agree on from the early season games. But that doesn't affect the entire game. That doesn't change the offensive game plan. And, Desmond Ridder played very well, especially in that second half. And I know you love him because he's a St. X guy. He's your boy. And I think that finally proved that Cincinnati is legit. And there are some people who aren't going to be totally on board until they see how they perform at Notre Dame. But Notre Dame looks beatable. They look very beatable. So that was my big takeaway from the noon kickoffs, was that Indiana needs to address the quarterback situation, figure out what's going on in Michael Penix's head. And Cincinnati is more real than I even thought they were. So, Les, I don't know if you want to take that topic and run with it, or if you've got another direction, another game that stood out to you, but go ahead. Floor's yours.
I'm going to take your floor and run with it. Well, do what I should be doing right now because I'm picking up some pounds and just keep running with it. But I'm going to address the Michael Penix situation first. And I agree 100% with you. He does not look like the same guy last year. And I don't know how much of that is the injury. I don't know how much of that is just him just getting his confidence completely shot. But that being said, I am going to disagree with you that I do believe that when McFadden got ejected, that was just a total blow to that IU defense. And then that's when you started seeing Cincinnati's offense really start coming alive. However, like you said, it also does show that Cincinnati can perform under pressure, something that a lot of the naysayers didn't know if they could do or not, playing in that weak American Conference. And they looked legit. Now, I've been saying since we started our college football talks, Cincinnati's going to the college football playoff. I just need Notre Dame to beat Wisconsin next week and then lose to Cincinnati. And then, of course, we know Cincinnati's going to roll through the American. I mean, UCF, Memphis, overall don't impress me. UCF just lost Dylan Gabriel. So, I mean, I like their chances even better. Yeah. And they just lost to Louisville. I mean, they lost to Louisville before Dylan Gabriel was injured, because he got injured on that final play, that pick six that everyone around here is talking about. But that's neither here nor there. But, yeah. Cincinnati is going to the college football playoff. I've been saying it all year. I'm going to stick to my grounds, and I believe in the Bearcats. That being said, as well, you said it was a great weekend for the Big Ten. I agree. So I'm going to stick to the Big Ten. and go to but I'm going to switch times a little bit and go to the late game. Talk about a little bit about that Penn State Auburn game. Now, we talked about how good of a game the Ravens and Chiefs game was. We started this podcast with a great game, and we're going to go to another great game that happened on Saturday night. And man, what a game. I'm going to tell you real quick, Matt, a tweet that I was proud of that is not getting nearly enough attention, if I don't say so myself, that shout out to you viewers, is that I asked the question, is Sean Clifford going for his doctorate? Because he was a surgeon in that second half. And let me tell you, Matt, I say this half sarcastic and half not sarcastic. Did he even miss a pass in the second half?
Oh, sorry. I'm still recovering from that joke. No, I don't really think he did. And, Penn State looks good enough to challenge Ohio State based on those first 3 games alone. Because, they've been in some real dogfights. They were in a dogfight with Wisconsin. They were in a dogfight with Auburn. And they're playing Villanova this weekend. So we'll just forget that's happening. But, Ohio State does look beatable. They've struggled with Tulsa for a while. Tulsa, yeah, not Tulane. They struggled with Tulsa for a while. Oregon came in and beat them at home, which never happens. And I think that we need to say something about this because, Les, can we just agree that the officiating in that game was just mind-boggling at points with the what down is it situation going on, with the catches going on? I was like, there are so many things in that game that could have gotten into Penn State's craw and just driven them crazy to the point where they do make a mental error. They do make a mistake that's costly because, it's one thing when you have to game plan for the Auburn defense, which, Auburn may be having a slightly down year, but it's still an SEC team in your house.
And they still have a good defense.
No. And then you got to think about, well, I hope the refs know where the ball's going or what the rule book is. But they didn't do that. They came through, they played tough, and they ended up with the win on a wideout, which, strangely enough, Penn State wideouts aren't really that effective. So it's amazing that even happened. But I think that was a big statement game for them to come back and overcome all that stuff and, the rumors around James Franklin and UFC and whatnot, and just get a big win at home that solidifies their place as one of the top teams in the Big Ten.
And that brings me to my next point is you mentioned about Ohio State and how they look so far. Look, Ohio State has a lot of problems right now, which we might get into later on in the show. But that being said, with how good the Big Ten looks and how down Ohio State looks, before I get into that, like the last several years, Ohio State has just been a powerhouse in the Big Ten. Like they've just almost seemed like it's Ohio State and everybody else. How open now is the Big Ten, given how Ohio State looks and how the rest of the Big Ten looks?
I think it's open. I think there are at least 3 teams I can think of that have a shot at a Big Ten championship, which is really unusual because usually I'm thinking about, oh, well, it's just a foregone conclusion whether Ohio State's going to play Minnesota or Wisconsin and then just win by 40 points. But I don't think that's going to happen because I look at Penn State. They look really good. Iowa looks very good as well. Those are the top 2, and you never know. A team could come out of nowhere. We don't know. Maybe Michigan actually is good. Maybe they'll play somebody good and look impressive. Heck, Rutgers is unbeaten right now. Freaking Rutgers. They have an undefeated matchup with Michigan this weekend. It's a marquee game. Rutgers. I'm sorry. I just can't get over Rutgers being undefeated right now. The Big Ten looks loaded. Maryland has a big win at West Virginia. I don't know if I'm ready to say that like Maryland, Indiana, and Michigan State are ready to go to the Big Ten championship. I don't think they are, but it's unusual the fact that I think it could be Ohio State, it could be Penn State, or it could even be Iowa coming out of the Big Ten because of just how deep they are this year. And if anything, that's going to make Nebraska fans even more angry. So, because we'll get to that game, I'm sure, sooner rather than later, but the Big Ten is just very deep, and I think there are 3 teams right now who have just as legitimate shot as any to actually win the Big Ten, and they may do it with a loss or 2. So I'll be interested to see how it unfolds. We're a quarter of the way in, but Iowa has 2 huge wins over very impressive opponents. I know they beat Kent State this week, but Before that, you started your season with Indiana and Iowa State, who were ranked at the time. That's a pretty tough way to start the year. I mean, it's not Alabama type tough, but it's still very tough. And I mean, even Penn State, you've got an SEC school and one of the biggest teams in the Big Ten West. And you went to the Big Ten West and won a game. And you had Auburn at home. So, I mean, that's almost as impressive as playing Oregon to me and losing. So I think those three teams are going to be vying for it. I think Iowa's going to end up winning the West just because there have been so many injuries on Wisconsin and Minnesota, especially, that I can't see them challenging that. But I could definitely see any of those three teams coming out of nowhere and just Ohio State, Iowa, or Penn State winning the Big Ten. And it's a nice thing to say because that is the one thing I lament about Big Ten football is that it always just feels like the Ohio State Invitational.
And with that being said, the Ohio State, they just look like they have a bunch of problems going on. So for me, we can talk about whether it's this or that, but for me, it's that rush defense. And that's the one problem playing in the Big Ten is that every team can run. So if you cannot shut down the run or at least contain the run, that is going to be a problem within the conference that you are going to face time and time and time again. I mean, we all know Iowa can run the ball. Even though we didn't see a lot of him as far as big runs against Auburn, Noah Cain is a heck of a back for Penn State. We all know Wisconsin can run the ball. So, I mean, for me, that is the biggest issue with Ohio State. If they do not get that straightened out, we're going to see a new Big Ten champion this year. But that's a big if. They still got time. Ryan Day is a heck of a coach. He can figure it out. And they honestly have several very good defensive line prospects that really haven't seen a lot of game time. So if that means you got to plug one of them in earlier than what you were expecting, then hey, maybe you got to do it. But, we're going to switch gears from a conference that looked really good in the Big Ten to a conference that didn't look good at all, and that's the ACC. I'm going to kick it off with the Virginia Tech Hokies. Coming off that big week 1 win against North Carolina, they go on the road, surprisingly the underdogs against West Virginia. And they had a chance to win late in the game, but the Mountaineers were able to force an incomplete pass on 4th down in the end zone and hold on. Also, North Carolina and Virginia was a real shootout game, but neither team really looked impressive. I mean, it was pretty much a battle of quarterbacks. It was Sam Howell and that Armstrong kid for Virginia that looks really good. But, of course, Miami just got absolutely curb stomped by Michigan State. And this is getting depressing at this point, Matt, because every year I'm hopeful that the U can be back because, when I'm growing up, I remember those great Miami teams. I remember just how much more entertaining college football was when Miami, USC, teams like that were good. And every year I'm hopeful that the U is back. And to a good friend of mine, Matt Spencer, I'm not saying this to suck up to you, but the U needs to be back. And I think that would take college football to a whole nother level if they get back. But every year I get hopeful that they're going to show these signs. I mean, I started it with the turnover chain. The turnover chain, we saw some light there, and then it never really gained momentum after that. And then when De'Aaron King transferred there, I'm like, oh, they finally have a quarterback option. And he's played well in spurts, but it just hasn't been enough. And now last week, I thought De'Aaron played really well, but Michigan State just overpowered them at every phase of the game. And it was just embarrassing. And I'm going to tell you who looks really in trouble right now is Clemson. Yes. I mean, we go from, Deshaun Watson, the brief stint of Kelly Bryant, and of course to my child, Trevor Lawrence, and now DJ Ungale, who is expected to be that next quarterback in line. He doesn't look that good, but it's not really even on him all the way. That offensive line has not picked up to where last year's was and the struggles that had last year. I mean, they have a lot of youth in the running back and skilled positions. I mean, hey, they got Justin Ross back, but you know how I feel about receivers. I mean, that's great, but oh, whoop-de-doo. The defense, they have some very good playmakers that'll be playing on Sundays. Brian Brzee, Miles Murphy, etc. But they do not look like the same dominant team that they had been over the past really close to a decade. They squeaked by Georgia Tech. And if they're squeaking by Georgia Tech, that is not a good sign for the rest of the season. I know the ACC is nothing really to jump up and down about. But man, this is not a good showing at all. And this is another reason why I did not think Clemson would make the college football playoff this year. They're just not the same team.
They're not. Unless I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you about one of the few ACC teams that did win this weekend, which is, in fact, our local beloved, not really, Louisville Cardinals. And I would like to point out, Les, that Louisville is going to play Wake Forest and Florida State over the next few games. And Clemson doesn't look great. I'm not saying Louisville looks any better, but I'm going to ask you this to put a percentage on it. Is there any chance that Louisville ends up in the ASCC championship game playing whoever wins I can't remember if they're in the Atlantic or the Coastal, playing the team from up north who ends up playing them? Is there any chance in hell that Louisville, if Malik Cunningham gets it together and looks like he did and doesn't get hurt because he's running for his life on every play, is there any chance that UCF game launches Louisville to a win streak that could take them to the ACC championship, especially with as weak as the ACC looks?
I don't think it's crazy to say that there's a percentage of that. With that being said, I think it's very low because they are in the Atlantic Division, which is, if there is a difficult part of the ACC, it is that division. That is where you have to play against the Clemsons of the world, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I will say this. As down as the ACC looks this year, Louisville's not much better than any of them. Louisville still has a lot of work to do on all sides of the ball. Heck, the quarterback doesn't even know what name he wants to go by half the time. I mean, I know he finally did settle on Malik because his grandma wants him to. But there's just so much indecisiveness with that Louisville team. I think if they do not win 8 games this year, I think Satterfield is gone, and we are starting a new era in Louisville football yet again. So I think there is a percentage they could, because the ACC is that down. But if I had to give an exact number, I think it'd be 20% or below.
I would go 40, just because I don't know how good. I mean, Florida State lost to Jacksonville State. I mean, I don't know. I don't think they're going to win the ACC at all, but I would not be surprised if they did go 8-4. Just because, you lose to Clemson, that's 2. You can drop 2 others to, insert ACC team here. Maybe you have a bad night against Wake Forest. Maybe you have a bad night against Miami. Maybe you have a bad night against Pittsburgh. But I would not be surprised at all if Louisville actually did end up winning 8 games, just because that game on Friday night where they played Central Florida with the back-to-back trading interceptions, it just felt like a momentum-changing type game, because you won close, you didn't look great in the first half, and then you come back and you win in just the most unexpected fashion, because I thought for sure Dylan Gabriel was going to drive them down the field for a game-winning field goal, and then just to have the ball bouncing off the helmet and into the on-waiting Louisville defender who just runs for his life right down the middle of the sideline and to the house. It's like a fairy tale ending. It's not really, it didn't feel real when I was watching it, and plus it was like midnight. So, I mean, that felt like a little bit of a momentum swing game. But like you said, there's still a lot of problems going on here, and it starts with the coach. Ever since the whole "I'm not leaving, oh, hi, South Carolina, you're cute" thing happened, it feels like it feels like there's some disjoint there. But I think, and in a way, I feel like this could end up biting Louisville in the ass, because let's say you do win 8 games, but they're not impressive. This, like we said, this year isn't impressive. You can beat up on Georgia Tech and Virginia all you want, and then next year when like Clemson's reloaded, maybe, just maybe, Miami is actually consistently good, and then you're right back in it at like 5-7, 4-8. And you have the same guy because you gave him more time because you won 8 games and made it to like the Music City Bowl to play some middling SEC team. So I don't know. I really don't know. I think Louisville has an interesting role in all this, and I'll be interested to see how they respond and if the long-term effects actually hurt more than they help if they do end up on a little bit of a win streak.
I'm going to stick with my 20% chance, because even though I see problems across the ACC altogether, I do believe that Clemson will take the Atlantic Division just based off talent alone. But they're still going to be out of the college football playoff, which they don't
no
deserve to be.
question.
Yeah, they don't deserve to be there. I
They
mean,
don't.
but anyways, so I think that wraps up my ACC talk. Of course, we got to talk about the SEC a little bit, just because we know those SEC fans are the loudest in the room, and they're probably going to get mad at us if we don't talk about them.
Probably.
The only conference in collegiate sports that will cheer for the other teams just because they're in the same conference. You can't go anywhere. You can't even go into a bar without seeing like some SEC fan just going, SEC, SEC. So don't worry, guys. We are getting to the SEC. So let's talk about one of the games, the interconference games of this weekend between Alabama and Florida, which I want to start by saying, Emory Jones, I had been very vocal about Florida starting Anthony Richardson over you, but you played very well against Alabama. So for that, I apologize. But I'm going to be honest, Matt. Florida is a good team. Absolutely. But Alabama may not be as unbeatable as people may think. And what are your thoughts on that?
I actually kind of disagree with you here, but not in the way you're thinking. The one thing I remember about Alabama, watching them for as long as I've been watching college football, is that they do have a tendency to struggle with the mobile type quarterback. I'm thinking back long ago to the era of Johnny Manziel when they lost that game. Alabama, for some reason, has a little bit of an Achilles heel when it comes to a quarterback who can move around outside the pocket. And they kind of exercised a little bit of that last season when they beat up on Ohio State. But Justin Fields had already basically had his soul taken from his body the week before when he took those punishing hits from Clemson. So it's kind of hard for me to say, like, oh, that exercised the bad mojo. But looking at last week where they could have, and I mean, it was a close game. It was a close game all the way to the wire. If there had been a few balls that had got bounced the right way, or they run a better play on that 2-point conversion instead of basically him shoving the running back into the end zone, which didn't make much sense to me, but okay. That it told me that Alabama can survive on the road in a close game against a mobile quarterback. Guy, and especially like when you don't know which quarterback you're going to get, which dose you're going to get. So I thought Alabama looked pretty okay. I don't like the fact they gave up that many points, but it's your first real road game against an SEC opponent. You probably won't play them again because, I think Georgia is still probably going to come out of the SEC East because their defense looks like it's slightly better than Florida's defense. So I would still take Georgia to come out of there, but what Alabama did, yes, we all, and I think that's part of it too. We've all come to expect Alabama to just come out there and, punch everyone in the mouth, win by 28 points, and that's the ball game. So we're just not used to seeing them like with a team who somewhat matches them anymore, especially because it doesn't seem like they go on the road much anymore. So I think that's part of the blessing and curse of Alabama is that the expectations are so high. When you aren't winning games by 35 points, even in conference, people are like, oh no, Bryce Petty, I did it again. Bryce doesn't look very good. Maybe this team isn't as good as we thought. And then they'll just come out next week and they'll beat Ole Miss. And they'll beat Ole Miss by like 40 points or something incredible that we're just like, oh my God, how can we ever doubt Nick Saban? We love you, Nick Saban. Please come and bless our firstborn children, Nick Saban. And that's just how it is. That's just the Alabama cycle. They seem to have like this game like every year where they where they win a little bit close and they're like, oh, maybe we need to back it off. And then the next week it's like, yeah, Alabama's going to win the national championship again. So that was my big takeaway is that they did they've always kind of struggled with mobile quarterbacks. And when they don't know which quarterback you're going to get, whether you're going to get the straight up run down the gut and things like that, it makes it a little more difficult. But Alabama is still Alabama, and I think next week we're all going to be saying that, and we'll all forget this Florida game happened because that's just the Alabama way. They may not always win impressively, but they always win.
Oh, Alabama's still Alabama. Let's not get that twisted at all. My thing is they didn't look as dominant as they had all season long. And that's fair point to what you said. They've always had their infamous struggles with the dual threat quarterbacks. So, yeah, only time will tell to see how good this Alabama team is. But, of course, it is Nick Saban. It is this talented Alabama team that should really be playing teams like the Jaguars and the Falcons instead of Florida and Miami. But anyways, trying to think of other things with the SEC I could really say. Oh, it goes to show Kentucky fans, this one is for you.
I knew this was coming.
This is for you. I told you all to pump the brakes on Will Levis. You did not listen to me. And then you squeaked by a victory against Chattanooga of all teams. I understand Chattanooga is expected to win their conference. But Will Levis in his last 2 games has thrown 3 touchdown passes and 3 interceptions and is barely over 50% completion percentage. This is the guy that you all told me would be Kentucky's Joe Burrow or Will Levis for Heisman. So I told you, pump the brakes, and this is why you need to listen to me. I'm telling you, Kentucky fans.
I'm not even upset with you for, telling Kentucky fans this. What I'm upset about is that you are dissing the alma mater of Terrell Owens like this. Chattanooga didn't do anything to you, Les. It's a beautiful city with beautiful people. They have an amazing aquarium, and this is how you repay them?
Aquariums do not win football games. Terrell Owens won football games. Aquariums do not.
Do you know what Chattanooga's mascot is?
Honestly, there's a baseball off the top of my head.
There's a baseball team in Chattanooga. They're a minor league team called the Lookouts, and they had Kentucky on the lookout to avoid a loss.
I see what you did there. Didn't.
Sports trivia for you all.
Yes,
in fact,
sir.
I think Chattanooga is actually the Reds affiliate, so that explains how I know these things. And it's also got Lookout Mountain. But Chattanooga, you're a beautiful city, and I love you, and you had a very good Greek restaurant. So don't listen to Les. You're beautiful. Terrell Owens, you're also beautiful. Don't listen to Les. But Kentucky fans, he's right about Will Levis. Focus on Wan'Dale Robinson. Let Wan'Dale Robinson be your guiding light and your peace.
Sounds like Coach Stoops also needs to pay attention to what jersey number his players are wearing. Have you heard about that story?
Yes, I have.
Cavassier Smoke, who has the coolest name in college football, I might add.
That is a very badass name.
It is, especially for a running back. You could just say he smoked his defender.
Or like, okay, he got the smoke.
He won't. You don't want the smoke.
You don't want this smoke.
You don't want the smoke. But anyways, changes his jersey number just so he can get more carries behind Chris Rodriguez. You got to love it. It's awesome. But anyways.
Chris Rodriguez. Now, there's a guy channeling my inner Chris Collinsworth. Now, there's a guy who I love watching. There's a guy. Oh, there's Bean. He's a guy, too. Now, who would win in a race, Bean or Chris Rodriguez? It'd be close.
My money's on Bean.
I feel like if you motivated Bean enough, he could. But Chris Rodriguez is just. I've really enjoyed watching him run the football the past few weeks. He's got such breakaway speed. I absolutely love it. He's not afraid of contact. He's got great breakaway speed. I love Chris Rodriguez, and I would not mind seeing the Colts pick him up if Marlon Mack is too expensive. Moving on,
I will say a team that I am usually never sold on. As in that I don't believe that they're not good, because they usually are. But I never view them as elite because they are always just too one-dimensional, and that is Georgia. Georgia could make some serious noise this year. The more I watch them, the more I am impressed. Now, I hope this early confidence in them does not turn to bite me in the butt. But I'm actually, for once in my life, I am sold on the Georgia Bulldogs. And I will say this. But really, checking my notes here, I don't really have – I have one more question. And it made by a good point with a good friend of mine, Jacob Klukas. We talked about USC being one of those teams that is just college football is just more enjoyable when they are back. But in recent years, we've seen this similar trend with them that you think they have a good quarterback coming in. He kind of underperforms, then gets hurt, and then their backup comes in and he starts lighting it up. And then USC thinks the cycle starts all over again. That the USC is thinking they finally found this guy. However, most of those guys are not Jackson Dart, who was the Gatorade National Player of the Year. I actually had his teammate on this podcast, Jackson Powers, earlier in the show, and he blocked for him at Corner Canyon High School on their way to 39 consecutive wins and 3 straight state titles. He led the nation in passing yards and passing touchdowns, and I kid you not, he threw for 67 touchdowns, Matt, as a senior in 1 year, while also rushing for 1,200 yards. So Jackson Dart can play. Has USC finally found their guy in Jackson Dart?
Maybe, but it doesn't matter this year. Because
That's
I
fair.
think this year is all about Oregon. Oregon in the north and Arizona State in the south. And I will stick by that. I really like Arizona State. I'm excited to see what they do. I know they got beat by BYU this weekend, but sometimes that happens. Sometimes that happens. I know. But I really like Oregon. I really like their defensive front. They still have the most impressive win in the conference because UCLA decided to squander their goodwill by just going out and letting Fresno State hang in the game with them and then beat the crap out of them in crunch time. So, I mean, Fresno State looked like they belong in the Pac-12 with the way they played with that last-second touchdown.
Fresno State is actually a pretty good team. We're talking about a team that hung with Oregon and a team that beat UCLA. The Bulldogs can play, man. Let's not throw any disrespect.
No, I'm not. The point of that was to praise Fresno State because they looked very good. They beat them in crunch time especially, and I would love to see Fresno State play Coastal Carolina or something, but I know that's not going to happen. But yeah, Jackson Dart looked very good. I didn't really watch that game. I was able to catch some highlights though, because at one point it looked like when I got my first score update about that game, Washington State was up like 14-0. And I was like, oh boy, here we go again. The quarterback's hurt, blah, blah, blah. They just fired Clay Helton the week prior. Here comes USC about to lay an egg again to Washington State of all teams. And I forget that Mike Leach isn't in Washington State anymore. He's down in Mississippi. So I was like, at least we'll get some Mike Leach. And I'm like, no, we don't even get that out of this game. We just get another crappy Pac-12 after dark where the over hits and everyone who's a degenerate blood money gambler freaks out. But no, Jackson Dart looked really good. He looked very good, and they end up winning that game, 44-14, something like that?
Or, yeah, 45-14.
Pitched a shutout after that point. And I mean, I think if he continues to play like that, he'll be the next freshman stud quarterback. But there are two problems with, like I said, this year is all about Oregon to me. All about Oregon and the health of Kevon Thibodeau and how well he plays for that defensive front. And the second thing is, what we're forgetting about this is that USC had a good weekend, but they still don't have a coach. We don't know who the future of USC is. And it could be anybody. It could be Eric Bieniemy, or it could be the offensive coordinator. And there's a big difference in the eyes of many between Eric Bieniemy and the offensive coordinator. We've talked about Urban Meyer, who's already starting to get cold feet down in Jacksonville. To me, it all depends, really. Jackson Dart looks good, yes. But who are they going to get to go with him to make sure he gets the next Reggie Bush to complement his Matt Leinart? How do they fill out the rest of that roster? Now to Clay Helton, who was a good coach and a good guy, but wasn't what USC needed, is gone. And I think the answer to that question will tell us a lot about where USC's headed and the trajectory of how they treat Jackson Dart.
Let me tell you why it's not going to be Eric Bieniemy. Because the athletic director that fired Eric Bieniemy at Colorado is now the athletic director at USC. So I highly doubt that Eric Bieniemy is going to be the head coach at USC now.
So what we need to do is What we need to do is call Taylor Swift because now we got some bad blood.
Oh my!
There
And
is no bad blood.
And I really don't think we're going to see Urban Meyer return to college football. I just really don't. I think if he doesn't make it in the NFL, I think he's going to hang it up for good this time. That's just me.
I don't know. Bright lights, wonderful weather. It's California, rich recruiting. You can be in a movie. Can you just imagine Urban Meyer directing like the Urban Meyer story or something?
I would
That would be
not see it just
horrible.
because of that title. Herb.
Herb,
Herb.
the Urban Meyer story.
Herb is like something else that goes on the West Coast, is what it sounds like.
Hey, well, that's in Colorado.
That's the whole West Coast, buddy.
Oh man, now we can go on a road trip.
I think we do. I think at that point I might go see Herb.
Yeah, it's spelled differently though. That's R-U-B, not H-E-R-B.
I know. But that
I
really
do want to ask you.
What's up?
I do want to ask you one thing seriously about the Pac-12, and that is, where would you rank Oregon's chances so far at making the playoff? Let's assume they run the table, they win the Pac-12, they win in an impressive manner, and let's say, let's set up the rest of the scenario. You could still have Cincinnati get in, of course, but let's say that like the Big Ten, Ohio State wins it. They win with Ohio State wins the Big Ten with 2 losses. Would you rather have undefeated Oregon from the Pac-12 or 2-loss Ohio State from the Big Ten?
Undefeated Oregon, because they beat Ohio State. So I think that's an easy one right there.
Even though the Big Ten we've determined is the better of the 2 conferences?
Well, absolutely, because Oregon still won the head-to-head matchup.
Okay. I'm just making sure because I have a feeling we'll be having this discussion yet again in December because it feels like we always end up here.
Right. And
or a 1-loss. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think, ironically enough, I think Cincinnati would be more in danger of that than Ohio State personally, just because they do play outside of the Power Five. But I think if Notre Dame beats Wisconsin, Cincinnati beats Notre Dame, and then they win out the American, I think you got to put them in. That's just my opinion. And I'm sticking to my guns. Cincinnati is making the college football playoff, and I am speaking it into existence. The Bearcats social media pages have already got on board with me, and that they are making the college football playoff. So
I agree. I would really love, and that's one of the things I really like about this season too, is that it's shaping up that we maybe get a little bit of a breather from the usual dose of Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, and Notre Dame, really, which is just gotten so monotonous. Call it, and Les, you can fire back at me, disagree with me with this. College football has really run the risk lately of becoming just the most regional sport you can imagine. Because like you said, Texas they haven't been Texas. Mm-hmm. USC is down, the U is down. Those are them and Notre Dame are the big 4 of like getting nationwide fan bases to watch. Those teams are the teams you love them or you hate them. You watch them because you want to see them lose or you want to see them win.
Right.
And without them, the college football teams that are left are Clemson, South Carolina Regional, Southern Regional, Georgia, Southern Regional, Ohio State, Midwest, really mostly Ohio, Alabama, Southern Regional. If you have those, you need all of America to have a really good college football future for everybody. And that's what matters. So I would think that if you don't have that going for you, that you've got to have that going for you. Because I think that now more than ever, people are fed up with the same 4 teams, the same 4 regional teams every year, and they want something different. They want a Cincinnati. They want somebody to go and just reinvigorate the college football world because it's boring. Mm-hmm. It's boring, Les. Like I said, for once, it doesn't feel like the Big Ten is the Ohio State Invitational. I want to watch Big Ten football, which is something I did not want to do over the past 10 years because it feels like it's all for naught. Because you're just going to end up with the same teams at the end from the South and the Midwest. There's not going to be any new team you haven't seen play, which is why the NCAA tournament gets it right. And I know it's not feasible to have 68 teams in a football tournament, but still, that's what's good about this year. That's what I love about this year so far. It's been more unpredictable. It feels like we're getting a little bit of a shift. It feels like teams that usually don't come to win are coming out of the woodwork. It's a good feeling to think that college football has some parity again. And I know I'm saying this, and then in 2 months it's going to be the same 4 teams, but Cincinnati is a great story. We need them in the playoff, just so I can hear people complain about chili. Because Cincinnati chili is really freaking good, and if you don't like it, get out. Just get out. Because 4 ways are the only way for me and a Coney dog. And that's all I got to say about that.
Well, I'm going to be honest, Matt. I haven't had too much chili that I don't like in my life. And you know what? Despite how much I work out on a daily basis, I'm still gaining weight right now. So it goes to show that I may want to back off the chili this as the fall progresses. But you're absolutely right. We need a Cincinnati in the college football playoff. We need some parity in college football. And this post-COVID year has been the perfect year to have some parity in college football. We had teams last year that we thought were going to be good, like a Penn State, like a Minnesota, that disappointed, that are seemingly back now. And it is great. The fans are back in the stadiums. And the excitement is just back into college football, and something I haven't felt like I have seen in a while. So I'm all for it. Let's get some differences. There's only so much we could do with some of the teams like Alabama. We know they're going to be Alabama. We know Oklahoma is going to win the Big 12. But we're seeing a lot of parity across the other Power 5 and non-Power 5 conferences that it could have some serious BCS shakeup come January.
And that's really all we can ask for.
It is. But now, Matt, I think we have talked enough about this Saturday's slate of games, or this weekend slate of games. I always forget that there's games on like Thursday and like Sunday and games. It's usually games I don't really watch, but anyways.
You don't watch action?
Not really.
Are you just you've insulted Chattanooga. Now you're going to insult Athens, Ohio, which is another beautiful city in the American Midwest. Bowling Green, another beautiful city in the American Midwest. What did Ohio do to you, Les? What did Ohio do to deserve this? They've got good pizza. They've got Bigfoot sightings at the wazoo. Cleveland actually doesn't suck as much as people say it does. I love Cleveland. You're killing me. You're killing me. Athens, Ohio. I love you. Know that, Ohio University. You sent me a letter when I was in high school, and I haven't forgotten you. Maction, number 1.
All right, state of Ohio, you need to drive your cars better. That's all I'm going to say about that.
You've got a point there. You do have
exactly. But anyway.
You had to say the one thing.
I just cut straight to the point, dude. That's just how I roll.
You did.
As these shows have progressed, I'm doing a lot better job of not trying to go too much in depth and just being short and sweet and to the point. And I think I'm getting pretty good at it. But anyways, we are going to transition to everyone's favorite part of the podcast, our top 5. And I'm going to be completely honest. While I was on vacation for work this week, my friend and I went to go see Shang-Chi, the new Marvel movie that came out, which was absolutely phenomenal, by the way. We had to get a movie reference in there somehow. But before the movie, my friend and I were sitting at Legend Crab, this new seafood place that had opened up right next to my house, and which is actually really good. You look at really
Legend
confused.
Crab?
Yes, Legend Crab.
Okay.
And it is legendary, let me tell you. It's some really good seafood.
Oh. Well, I'll have to try it. It's just Legend Crab.
And I also want to shout out the bartender that literally streamed the Colts game on one of the TVs just specifically for me. So that was awesome of you. I tipped him really well too. But anyways,
you don't know who he is. He's a hero of the week.
I don't want to give away too much personal information, but I do have his name. He's a really nice guy. Well, of course, he's a nice guy. He streamed the Colts game for me, so I couldn't watch it on my TV. So he's like, you know what? I'll pull it up for you, dude. Very nice gesture of him, and I hope that you do great things in life. But anyways,
here's the legendary crab guy.
Back to earlier in the week when I'm going to see Shang-Chi with one of my friends. We got a bite to eat at Legend Crab, and I just happened to see a chart on one of the televisions talking about all the players that are playing, or no, all the players that Alabama had lost a season ago, like they do every year, how they lose so much talent and they reload, yada, yada, yada. But it showed all the players that are now playing in the NFL from last year's team. So I asked a simple question on Twitter. Could an all Alabama team win a Super Bowl? And the overwhelming answer to that, well, 67% of the voters said yes, that an all Alabama team would win the Super Bowl. I know, Matt, you specifically said no because you wanted some more depth at the offensive line position.
No, I didn't say no.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say no. I was just like, I don't know if they'd win. Oh, did you ask if they win a Super Bowl?
Yeah, asked if they would win a Super Bowl.
Oh, okay. I said they'd make it to the conference championship, but I don't know about a Super Bowl.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, I agree with what you said. I mean, that is important. That they would need more offensive line depth. I'm big on offensive line and the importance that it plays in wins and losses. But anyways, based on that question alone, Matt and I have decided that we are going to give our top 5 college football players that we would want to see join their current alma maters. So the team that is currently playing now, and we take one of those teams' all-time players and put them on today's roster. What would we pick? So Matt, am I going first or are you going first?
I'm gonna let you go first since you're the host, and I know what yours are, so I can react and be like.
So I guess my first 2, they're obviously going to be the homer picks. They're going to be the guys I would want to put on Duke and Texas. So personally, I'm going to go with number 5, and I'm going to go with my Texas Longhorns. I couldn't really find an overly successful offensive lineman if I had to pick just one guy. So I went with Earl Thomas because I feel like we're good at running back. You know, as much as I would love to see Vince Young play in a Texas uniform again, look, I like the direction that Texas quarterbacks are heading under the new Steve Sarkisian system. So I went with Earl Thomas. Look, replace Braden Schooler at the free safety position, and that's a heck of a defense right there. You got BJ Foster next to on one side, Earl Thomas on the other. Quarterbacks, good luck. That's all I'm going to say.
Good luck.
And a Pete Kwiatkowski system at that. Sorry, y'all are done for. Anyways, number 4, and I'm going to go with the best offensive lineman in Duke history and put him on a team that desperately needs an offensive lineman, and that is Laken Tomlinson. He is the only Duke offensive lineman to be drafted in the first round in our program history.
Pretty good to be that good.
That's yeah. Enough said. There's just not a lot to say about Duke football. I'm aware of this. It's funny, you know, before I go on to my number 3 pick, one of my buddies in my group chats loves to give me crap about Duke football. And then I'm always like, yeah, I know, you know, bad showing, yada, yada, yada. He's always like, well, that wasn't the answer I was expecting. I was like, well, what did you think I was going to say? Like, you're over here saying, oh, you all suck. I'm like, dude, I know. Like, it's Duke football. This is nothing new to me. I understand this.
There are no expectations.
There's not. Like, I mean, dude, we've had some good seasons over the past several years, but I mean, overall, we're not a historically great football school. It just is what it is.
Like IU.
Right. I understand this. It's okay. Anyways, number 3, and this is where it's going to get real strategic. Look, we all know about the success Oklahoma has had in the Lincoln Riley era, but the one thing they have been missing is defense. So plug in the greatest defensive player in Oklahoma history, somebody that can energize that whole group, someone that can really stabilize the Alex Grinch defensive coordinator era in Norman, and that is the boss himself, Brian Bosworth. Not only was he a fantastic player, his personality gives them an identity, and that's someone they can get behind and make Oklahoma take the next step and win a national title. Number 2, as I mentioned earlier, Ohio State's run defense is poor, and it needs adjusting now if they want to get back to the college football playoff. So I plug in former middle linebacker A.J. Hawk to help with that run defense. One of the better Ohio State linebackers I had seen in my lifetime. Now, granted, there's been a lot of good ones to pick from. I know James Laurinaitis would be a very popular pick as well. But AJ Hawk for me was just somebody who could just plug the running lanes. And it's something that Ohio State desperately needs this year. So I'm going AJ Hawk with my number 2. And my number 1. And as we mentioned earlier, college football would be so much better if the U was finally back. So who do I want to come in? None other than one of the best leaders. And I know what you're going to say. I almost thought about Ray Lewis, but I decided to go Ed Reed just because of the impact that he had in those 2000s Miami locker rooms. The playmaking he could also have not only on the defensive side of the ball, but in the return game. Look, Ed Reed just is what Miami is all about. And if you get him back on those Miami teams, I think we could start seeing a resurgence in South Beach. So those are my top 5. I have Earl Thomas, Laken Tomlinson, Brian Bosworth, AJ Hawk, and Ed Reed.
That's a really good list. I almost want to surprise you didn't put Cam Hayward for Ohio State or one of the Bosa brothers, but yeah, AJ Hawk, he could definitely plug that line a little bit better. So
yeah, I think the Bosa brothers were better. Hayward would have been a good pick, but the Bosa brothers, they were more pass rushers. I mean, they could get to the backfield, but I mean, kind of like with those old Colts teams with Freeney and Mathis, you got those two coming off the edge. They would just run it up the gut to avoid those two. So that's kind of where I was going with the AJ Hawk pick.
I can totally understand that. And now, I guess it's time for my really weird top 5 list because I think Les is going to hate it, and that's what I like to do. So starting with number 5, I kind of had a little bit of a tie going here because my first goal would be to make the football schools of Indiana that aren't Notre Dame have fun again. So how am I going to do that? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put Antoine Randall L. back on IU. And why would I do that? Because he's a freaking Army knife. The guy could do anything. He could play quarterback, he could play running back, he could play receiver. And if you threw him in on that offense with Penick and Steve Carr from the transfer from USC and Freifogel and Hendershot and gave them that guy, Antoine Randall L., who's just one of the best IU football players in the kind of sad but interesting history of IU football, I think that would help them. They might have beaten Cincinnati if they had that guy. Because let me tell you, if there's one thing I know about Antoine Randall L. is that the NFL didn't do how good he was in college justice. He is just an amazing athlete, an amazing Swiss Army knife of an offensive weapon, and I would definitely love to see Antoine Randall L. on the current IU team as loaded as it is. And my second one would go to Purdue because I don't know if anyone watched this game because it was on at a weird time. And, of course, Notre Dame is so precious they have their own network. But Notre Dame played Purdue this weekend. And Purdue has David Bell, who is one of the best offensive weapons I've seen in modern college football. He's actually one of the few high school football players I watched play. He was a 2-sport athlete. He beat Romeo Langford in the state championship rounds. He's a hell of an athlete, and this week was his coming out party. The problem is Purdue doesn't have a quarterback. They never have really had a great quarterback, and it's been a while. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the last great Notre Dame quarterback and bring Drew Brees back into the picture. Because let me tell you something. If Drew Brees was throwing to David Bell, that would be something else, man. That would be something else. I would absolutely love that. Purdue has no running game. They did have a running game, but Zach Horvath hurt himself. But, man, I would just love to see Drew Brees lighting up a scoreboard with David Bell. Because that would just be amazing to me because, I would just love watching an IU Purdue game with Drew Brees running the show and Antoine Randall L. on the other side. That would just be like one of the most amazing things I have ever seen. So that would be my number 5, Antoine Randall L. to IU and Drew Brees back to Purdue.
Hold on. Before you continue, are you saying that Purdue hasn't had a good quarterback in a while, or are you saying they've had very few or over the years, or what were you implying there?
I'm just implying they needed help lately.
Okay.
Because they've
had a lot of good quarterbacks over the years, just maybe not as of recent.
No, just not recently. And they've had Rondale Moore and David Bell on the roster recently. And it's a damn – and looking at what those guys could do with mediocre quarterbacks, can you imagine either one of them with Drew Brees? Or like
Hell, even
Bob
Brian
Brees?
Greasy.
Yeah, I mean, woof. That would be a hell of an offense right there. So that's why I've got that. So moving on to my number 4 pick, Les. This is another team who, when they're good,
You're on 3 or 4?
4. Sorry, this is number 4.
Oh, got you.
Number 4. There's another program that I think is better when that I think makes college football better when they're good, and that would be Florida State. But Florida State, they just don't have the swagger they used to have, especially on defense. So I'm getting in the Wayback Machine, and I'm bringing back Deion Sanders and Derek Brooks to play defense for the Florida State Seminoles.
We're going
because they got to – I accidentally did that on all of these. Yay. Because, man, Florida State just needs to get that swagger back, the swagger they had back when Bobby Bowden was coach. They've had moments, and I mean, Jameis Winston, the Jameis Winston title, of course, being one of them. But even then, those two guys, Deion Sanders was one of the most transformative players in football history, in my opinion, and Derek Brooks is definitely one of the top 10 middle linebackers I've ever watched play. So, I mean, if you put those guys back on Florida State, I think it would definitely change their luck and direction. And they would also play with that unique kind of like winning attitude, like you talked about with Ed Reed, that would get them going again. So now it's time for my number 3. And speaking of Ed Reed, I did not pick Ed Reed, but De'Ara King needs help. We got to get him somebody out there. So who did I pick to help him out? Well, we're going to go out and we're going to get a guy who's near and dear to our hearts by the name of Reggie Wayne. And we're also going to go get Michael Irvin to go talk some trash on the other side. Because if you can imagine, if you're a quarterback running for your life, who would you rather be throwing to than Reggie Wayne and or Michael Irvin on the other side? Because not only will Michael Irvin catches the ball, he's going to let you know it. And Reggie Wayne will just be death by 1,000 cuts. Because you cannot stop Reggie Wayne. You can only hope to contain him. And that was both in his Miami career and his NFL career. Reggie Wayne is just a dominant receiver, and so is Michael Irvin. They're going to get the job done. They're going to help De'Ara King not get flattened on every play against Alabama. Number 2, Les, this is me helping you out in every way I can imagine, because what's really going to put Cincinnati over the top? How about we bring back their number 1 overall receiver, Marty Gilliard?
Hey, let's go.
First team All Big East more times than I could count. Could go up and make just these amazing catches, and it's going to help Desmond Ridder get good on that side of the ball. And to help on the defensive side of the ball, I'm bringing in Trent Cole to get to the quarterback. Because Trent Cole, he's one of the underrated pass rushers in NFL history. He was pretty good in college. He made the second team honorable mentions a few times. But that's the kind of guy who can get a strip sack, fumble, and really change the fortune of the game. And Marty Gilliard was just one of the best receivers I ever saw go up and catch a football.
I want to say, finally, I'm surprised you didn't put Derek Wolfe there.
I could have. It was very close for me, but Derek Wolfe, I almost did. I don't know why I went with Trent Cole. I know I went with Trent Cole. He was a Colt. I got to stick with Colts. Colts are magical, you know.
Anyone who tells Tom Brady that he's going to eat his children has a soft spot in my heart.
Mind games, Les. Mind games. And finally, for my number 1, because we've talked about them a little bit, we know Kayvon Thibodeau is an amazing defensive player. But what if, back in the 1960s, the LA Rams, they had a fearsome foursome. I'm going to create my own because Kayvon Thibodeau is going to be next to Haloti Ngata and DeForest Buckner. And that is probably the fiercest pass rush you'll ever going to run into a brick wall of. And that, I think, would be good enough to put Oregon into maybe a national championship game if you could stonewall guys with those 3 and then whoever's playing the other end. So that's my top 5. Antoine Randall in Indiana and Drew Brees on Purdue. Florida State at number 4 with Deion Sanders and Derek Brooks. Number 3, Miami with Reggie Wayne and Michael Irvin. Number 2, Marty Gilliard and Trent Cole back on Cincinnati. And number 1, Haloti Ngata and DeForest Buckner helping Kayvon Thibodeau bring down Jackson Dart every damn play.
That's probably the greatest defensive line in college football I've ever seen. At least unit.
I thought you'd like it.
I thought the goal was for me to not like this, but this is awesome. That's a good one. I like it.
I would love watching these guys suit up with the teams as they are now, because a lot of those, it's like how much the fortunes have changed in like 3 or 4 years to see that. But I'm just imagining like an old Oak bucket game with Drew Brees going up against this current Indiana offense. That game would be like 65-66. It would be beautiful. So
Oh, it'd be an
that's my
offensive
top
matchup.
five. That's
I
my
like
top
it, man.
five.
I like it, Matt. That concludes me and Matt's top five for the show, and it also concludes the episode of this week's podcast. As always, like and subscribe to the Less is More Sports podcast channel. The hat is back. It is now. So does that mean that there is cap now?
The cap goes back on until next week.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But as always, like and subscribe to the channel. Comment in the section below. Tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, what we could do better. And without further ado, Matt and I are out.
We love you, Chattanooga.
No, we don't.
You're killing me.